I've been getting tons of requests for camping horror stories, and honestly, I've been hesitant to cover them. But these 3 submissions were so disturbing, I couldn't ignore them. So grab a blanket, lock your doors, and let's dive into these nightmares. What you're about to hear are real experiences from real people who thought they were heading out for a peaceful weekend in nature. They expected to disconnect from the world, breathe fresh air, and maybe see some wildlife. Instead, they encountered something far more terrifying than any bear or wolf could ever be.
This story comes from Jake, a 28-year-old software engineer from Oregon. Last summer, he decided to take a solo camping trip to clear his head after a brutal breakup. I'd been camping since I was a kid, so heading out alone didn't worry me. I chose a remote spot in the Cascade Mountains, about 3 hours from Portland. The kind of place where you don't see another soul for days. That's exactly what I thought I needed. I arrived Friday evening, just as the sun was setting. The campsite was perfect. A small clearing surrounded by dense pine trees with a creek running nearby. I set up my tent, built a fire, and cooked some dinner. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely peaceful. That first night passed without incident. I slept better than I had in weeks. Saturday morning, I went on a long hike, explored the area, took some photos. It was therapeutic. But as evening approached, something felt different. I was sitting by the fire around 9 p.m. when I first noticed it. A feeling like someone was watching me. You know that sensation when the hair on your neck stands up for no reason? I looked around but saw nothing except trees and shadows dancing in the firelight. I tried to shake it off. Being alone in the wilderness can play tricks on your mind, right? But the feeling persisted. Every few minutes, I'd catch myself scanning the tree line, expecting to see eyes reflecting the firelight. Around 10:30, I heard a branch snap somewhere behind my tent. Not the gentle cracking of settling wood, but the sharp snap of something heavy stepping on it. I grabbed my flashlight and called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence. I walked around my campsite, shining the light into the woods. Nothing. But as I turned back toward the fire, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the soft dirt near my tent. Human footprints. And they weren't mine. The prints were larger than my size 10 boots, maybe size 12 or 13. They circled my tent completely, like someone had been walking around it while I sat by the fire. But that was impossible. I would have heard them, seen them. I spent the next hour checking and rechecking the perimeter of my campsite. The footprints were definitely real and definitely fresh, but there was no trail leading to or from them. It was like someone had just materialized, walked around my tent, and vanished. Sleep was out of the question. I sat by the fire all night, feeding it logs to keep it burning bright, constantly scanning the darkness. Every sound made me jump. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through leaves, the distant howl of a coyote. But it was the silence that terrified me most. Those long stretches where the forest went completely quiet, like every living thing was holding its breath. As dawn broke, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. The footprints could have been from another camper who'd passed through earlier. Maybe I just hadn't noticed them before. I decided to stay one more night to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. Sunday was beautiful. I spent the day hiking, fishing in the creek, reading a book. As evening approached, I felt confident that Saturday night had been a product of my imagination and post-breakup stress. I built up the fire again and was roasting marshmallows when I heard something that made my hands shake. Whistling. Someone was whistling a tune I didn't recognize, somewhere in the woods behind me. The whistling was slow, deliberate, and completely out of place. It would stop for a few seconds, then start up again from a slightly different direction. Like whoever was doing it was moving through the trees, circling my campsite. "Hey," I shouted. "I know you're out there. "What do you want?" The whistling stopped. Then, after about 30 seconds of silence, I heard a voice. A man's voice, deep and raspy, calling from somewhere in the darkness. "Nice fire you got there." My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. "Who are you? What do you want?" No response. But I could hear footsteps now. Definitely footsteps, moving through the underbrush. Not toward me, but around me, maintaining a constant distance, like a predator stalking prey. This went on for hours. The footsteps, occasional whistling, and sometimes that voice calling out random observations. "Smells like you're cooking something good." "That's a nice tent." "You look tired." The fact that he could see me clearly, while I couldn't see him at all, was the worst part. I was completely exposed in the firelight, while he remained hidden in the darkness. Around 3 a.m., everything went quiet. No footsteps, no whistling, no voice. The silence stretched on until sunrise, and I finally allowed myself to believe he'd left. But when I went to pack up my tent, I found something that still gives me nightmares. Carved into the tree right behind where I'd been sleeping was a message: "See you next time." I threw everything into my car and drove straight home, constantly checking my rearview mirror. I never found out who was in those woods with me, and I never went back to find out. To this day, I still check the locks on my doors twice before bed, and I've never been camping alone since.
Our second story comes from Sarah, a 25-year-old teacher from Colorado who thought a camping trip with friends would be the perfect way to celebrate the end of the school year. We'd planned this trip for months, me, my roommate Lisa, and our friends Marcus and Jenny. The plan was to spend 3 days at a remote campground in Rocky Mountain National Park. We wanted to get away from cell service, social media, all of it. We arrived Thursday afternoon and found the perfect spot near a small lake. The ranger at the entrance had mentioned that we might be the only campers in that section since it was still early in the season. That sounded perfect to us. Setting up camp was fun. We pitched our tents in a circle around where we planned to build the fire pit, unpacked our supplies, and started dinner as the sun began to set. Everything felt exactly right. It was Marcus who first noticed the other campsite. We were sitting around the fire, probably around 10 p.m., when he pointed across the lake to what looked like another group of tents barely visible in the moonlight. "Guess we're not alone after all," he said. We could make out the shapes of maybe 3 or 4 tents, and what looked like the remains of a campfire. But there were no lights, no sounds, no signs of activity. They must have gone to bed early, Lisa suggested. We thought nothing more of it and continued our evening. The next morning, we decided to hike around the lake. As we got closer to the other campsite, something felt wrong. The tents were old, really old, faded and torn in places. Some were partially collapsed. The fire pit was full of old, waterlogged ashes like it hadn't been used in years. "This place has been abandoned for a long time," Jenny observed, poking at one of the tent stakes with her hiking pole. But that didn't make sense. The ranger would have cleaned up an abandoned campsite, wouldn't he? And we were sure we'd seen it just the night before, looking occupied. Marcus unzipped one of the tents to peek inside. What he saw made him stumble backward. "Don't look," he told us, his face pale. "Just don't look." But of course we looked. Inside the tent were sleeping bags, backpacks, and personal belongings scattered around like someone had left in a hurry. But everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and debris. Some items looked like they'd been there for decades. In one sleeping bag, we found a wallet. The driver's license inside belonged to someone named David Chin, and it had expired in 1987, nearly 40 years ago. We checked the other tents and found similar scenes. Personal belongings left behind, but aged far beyond what made sense. A camera with film still in it, hiking boots that looked like they'd been sitting there since the 80s, a journal with entries that stopped abruptly in the middle of a sentence dated July 15th, 1987. The last entry read, "Something's not right here. The other campers across the lake keep staring at us, but they never move. Going to investigate tomorrow." My hands were shaking as I read it. We were the campers across the lake now. Had someone been watching us the same way? We decided to leave immediately. This place felt cursed, haunted, wrong in every possible way. But as we hurried back to pack up our own campsite, Lisa pointed something out that made my blood freeze. "Look at our tents," she whispered. From across the lake, our bright, modern tents would have looked exactly like occupied campsites to anyone watching from the abandoned camp. Just like those old tents had looked to us the night before. "How long do you think we've been here?" Marcus asked, and something in his voice made us all check our phones, our watches. According to my phone, it was still Thursday, the same day we'd arrived. But that was impossible. We'd been here a full night and most of the next day. Yet every clock, every device we had, insisted that no time had passed at all. We packed faster than I've ever packed anything in my life. As we loaded the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from across the lake. But every time I looked, I saw only those old, abandoned tents. The drive back to civilization felt endless. None of us spoke. We were all thinking the same thing. What if we hadn't left? What if we'd stayed another night? Would we have ended up like David Chen and his friends, frozen in time at an abandoned campsite, watching new campers arrive across the lake? When we finally got home and checked the date on our computers, on the news, everywhere we could think of, it confirmed what our phones had been telling us. No time had passed. We'd spent what felt like over 24 hours at that campsite, but according to the rest of the world, we'd left and returned the same day. I've tried to research what happened to David Chen's group, but I've never found any missing persons reports from 1987 that match. It's like they never existed at all, except for that journal entry and those personal belongings rotting in the tents. Sometimes I wonder if we're still there, across the lake, watching new campers set up their tents and thinking they look so real, so alive, so present. Maybe what we think is our normal life now is just an echo, and the real us never left that campsite at all. I know how crazy this sounds, but I can't stop thinking about it. None of us have been camping since, and we don't talk about what happened. But sometimes late at night I get texts from Lisa, Marcus, or Jenny that just say, "Are we still there?" And honestly, I'm not sure how to answer.
Our final story comes from Mike, a 29-year-old mechanic from Montana who went on what was supposed to be a relaxing camping trip with his college buddy Tom. Neither of them expected to encounter someone who'd been living in the wilderness for far too long. Tom and I had been planning this trip for months. We wanted to get away from everything: work stress, relationship drama, city noise. We chose a remote area in the Bitterroot National Forest, the kind of place where you need a 4WD just to reach the trailhead. We hiked in about 6 miles Friday afternoon and found the perfect spot near a small alpine lake. The weather was perfect, and we spent the evening fishing, drinking beer, and catching up. For the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed. Saturday morning, we decided to explore the area. The plan was to hike to a ridge about 3 miles north, take some photos, and be back by evening. The trail was well marked at first, but after about an hour, it started to fade. That's when we found the makeshift shelter. It was built into the side of a rocky outcrop, camouflaged with branches and tarps. If Tom hadn't needed to take a leak and wandered off the trail, we never would have seen it. But there it was, a crude lean-to filled with gear that looked like it had been there for years. "Someone's been living up here," Tom whispered, pointing to the shelter. Inside, we could see sleeping bags, canned food, camping gear, and what looked like hunting equipment. A lot of hunting equipment: rifles, compound bows, knives, and boxes of ammunition. More weapons than any normal hunter would need. "We should go," I said. Something about the setup felt wrong. This wasn't a seasonal hunting camp. This was someone's permanent home, and they were heavily armed. But Tom was curious. He wanted to look closer, see if there were any clues about who lived there. Against my better judgment, I followed him. That's when we saw the notebook. It was sitting on a makeshift table inside the shelter, open to a page covered in cramped handwriting. The entries were dated, going back months. Most of it was incoherent rambling about them and watching, and can't trust anyone. But some entries were clear enough to make my blood run cold. July 15th, hikers passed through today. Couple with matching backpacks followed them for 2 miles. They never knew. July 22nd, family with kids at the lake. Too many witnesses. Waited until they left. August 3rd, solo hiker, male, late 20s. Got close enough to touch his tent. He never woke up. There were dozens of entries like this. Someone had been stalking campers and hikers in this area for months, maybe years. And based on the fresh dates, they were still active. "Mike," Tom whispered urgently, "look at this." He was pointing to the last entry, dated just the day before. 2 men, late 20s, fishing at the Alpine Lake, set up camp on the south shore. Easy approach from the north. That was us. Someone had been watching us since we arrived, and they'd written about us in their journal like we were prey animals. We got out of there fast, but not fast enough. As we hurried back toward the trail, I heard a branch snap behind us. Then another. Someone was following us, trying to stay hidden, but not quite managing it. "Don't look back," I told Tom. "Just keep walking." But the footsteps behind us were getting closer. Whoever it was wasn't trying to hide anymore. They wanted us to know they were there. When we finally reached the main trail, I risked a glance over my shoulder. About 50 yards behind us was a man in full camouflage gear, carrying a rifle. He was tall, probably in his 40s, with long gray hair and a beard. He wasn't running, just walking steadily, like he had all the time in the world. "Hey," he called out. "You boys been up to my camp?" We didn't answer. We just kept walking, trying not to look like we were fleeing. But he was gaining on us. "I asked you a question." His voice was louder now, more aggressive. "You been messing with my stuff?" That's when we started running. The next 2 miles were the longest of my life. Every time I thought we'd lost him, I'd hear that voice echoing through the trees. Sometimes he was shouting threats. Sometimes he was just making noise, banging on trees with something metal, letting us know he was still back there. "You can't hide from me," he yelled. "I know these woods better than you know your own backyard." When we finally reached our campsite, we didn't even discuss it. We threw everything into our packs as fast as we could and started hiking toward the trailhead. The sun was already setting, and hiking in the dark was dangerous, but staying was worse. We were about halfway back to the car when we heard the gunshot. The sound echoed across the valley, and we knew it wasn't a hunter shooting at an animal. It was a message. He was telling us he was still out there, still following, and he was armed. 2 more shots followed in quick succession. Closer this time. "He's hurting us," Tom panted as we stumbled down the trail by flashlight. "He knows where the trail goes. He's pushing us toward something." Tom was right. The shots seemed designed to keep us on the main trail, to prevent us from cutting through the woods or finding alternative routes. But what choice did we have? We didn't know the area well enough to navigate cross-country in the dark. The next 3 hours were a nightmare. Every few minutes, we'd hear another gunshot, sometimes behind us, sometimes off to the side. He was playing with us like a cat with mice, letting us know he could end this any time he wanted. At one point, we heard his voice much closer than it should have been. "You boys are pretty fast," he called from somewhere in the darkness. "But I got all night, and I know where you're going." We didn't stop to respond. We just kept moving, our flashlights bobbing frantically as we stumbled over roots and rocks. When we finally reached the parking area around 2 a.m., I've never been so relieved to see our truck. We threw our gear in the back and drove off without even checking our equipment. It wasn't until we were back in town that we called the police. We gave them the GPS coordinates of the shelter, described the man who'd followed us, and showed them photos Tom had taken of the notebook. The police said they'd investigate, but when they called us back a week later, they said they couldn't find any trace of the shelter or the man. The area we described was empty, with no signs anyone had been living there. But I know what we saw. I know what was in that notebook. And I know someone followed us through the woods that night, firing a rifle to keep us moving. The worst part is not knowing if he's still out there. The police said there had been reports of missing hikers in that area over the past few years, but no evidence of foul play. People just disappear sometimes in the wilderness, they said. But I think about that notebook, about all those entries describing campers and hikers. I think about the dates that stopped appearing after our visit. And I wonder if we were supposed to be the last entry, if our names were supposed to join the list of people who just disappeared in the woods. I still camp occasionally, but never in remote areas, and never without telling multiple people exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. Because I learned that the most dangerous predator in the wilderness isn't a bear or a mountain lion. It's the human who's been out there too long, who has forgotten how to live among people and sees other humans as just another type of prey to hunt.
These three stories remind us that the wilderness holds mysteries we may never understand. Whether you believe them or not, one thing is certain: nature is not always the peaceful escape we think it is. If you have your own camping horror story, send it to us. But be warned, once you put these experiences into words, once you share them with others, they have a way of becoming more real than you'd like. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing in the woods isn't what you can see. It's what's watching you from the shadows, learning how to be you. Sleep well tonight, if you can.